Florida Writer Podcast, a discussion about writing and other things. This is Allison Nissen, your host, and today I am with Arthur Doweyko. You're going to have to say it for
Doweyko.
me. Doweyko. I definitely would not have gotten that one. I should have asked you beforehand so I sounded more professional.
There you go.
But I am honored to have him here with me, and I'm going to give you 1 minute to give your elevator pitch about who you are and what you do.
Who I am. I'm a scientist, artist, and writer. What I do currently is I teach part-time at the Indian River State College, and I fill my days with writing and painting at the moment.
So I understand you are a scientist specializing in the field of drug design. Now, what is that? What is drug design?
Well, it could be all sorts of things. My previous job was with a large pharmaceutical company. We spent a lot of time working on computer models of drug interaction with targets, helping various areas of study, for instance, immunology, cardiology, things like that, oncology. These various studies include people that actually do the biology, they do a lot of the testing and so forth, and a lot of the chemistry. And I work with all of them to help design drugs using computer-aided methods, some of which I developed myself.
That's amazing. And somehow or another, you took that career and turned into writing and painting. So that's a different part of your brain.
Yeah, it's not too different, actually. If you ask any of my colleagues, they would say a lot of what I was doing is science fiction anyway.
Okay, that's good. All right.
But I've always enjoyed science and art at the same time. In high school, I was fortunate or unfortunate enough to have a vocational test. I don't know if anyone's had one of those recently, but what happens is it's like a big aptitude test. So you score various questions a certain way. And when it came back, I had two peaks of interest, exactly equal of interest. And that one was science and one was art. So I asked my father, what should I do? And my father said, look, you can always be a scientist and do art, but it's really doubtful you could be an artist and do science. And so I took his advice, and that's the way I went.
That's good advice. I like dads that give powerful advice.
Yeah.
You were able to take that science and love of writing and turn to science fiction?
Yeah, I always loved science fiction. When I was a kid, all I did was read comic books. I know it doesn't sound like a whole lot of good reading, but I'll tell you, if you look at comic books today, they're actually written in a lot of depth. At the time I was reading comic books, they weren't so deep and so psychologically warped.
So POW was not exactly the most complex word in the language?
No, we had other words.
Other words?
But anyway, Superman, Batman, and all the other characters had me enthralled. And at the same time, there were television bits like Twilight Zone and so forth that caught my attention. And I really, really enjoyed retelling the stories to my childhood friends. And so I still remember that quite vividly. I remember the looks on their faces. And that translates today to writing something down that still engenders the same kind of looks, hopefully, on readers.
How do you take the science fiction and make it realistic, something believable?
Yeah, the trick there in general is not to make it too complicated, not to have ray guns and spaceships and transporters and all that nonsense, which it's hard for a reader to swallow all that all at one time. My first inclination is to pick the science that I know best, extrapolate it slightly, make it kind of fun to see what it might be in the future, and stick to it in the world that I create so that a reader can follow it and understand it. And in fact, maybe even learn a little bit of real science while going through it. It's sort of like Arthur C. Clarke with his 2001 novel. All the science that was in there is pretty much real and has been real for a long time. And yet the story is enthralling. So that's sort of what I shoot for. But occasionally I will divert. I'll occasionally do a Twilight Zone kind of thing and do a little fantasy.
All right. What is the common thread among all your writings?
Well, the common thread is one of wonder. When I look out at the night sky, I get this feeling, which I'm sure a lot of the readers or listeners can appreciate. This kind of a wonder whether we are alone, why are we here, where are we going, what's this all about? That's basically, I know it sounds pie in the sky, but that's basically the kind of theme that underlies a lot of my writing. My first book, Algorithm, was basically a novel on exactly those themes, and it was based very strongly on the science we know of DNA. Because I figured if there was an answer somewhere, it'd be written in our DNA.
And if it's written in our DNA, how do you plot that into the next work. So did you have a follow-up for Algorithm, or was that a standalone book?
It's almost a standalone book. There is an ending which begs the question of what happens next, as any good book will do. I haven't gotten around to writing a sequel, but basically Algorithm takes us, the adventure there is, it could be very dry. It could be a lab scene where people are discovering things and talking to each other about nonsense, and the reader will get bored and disgusted quite quickly. In this case, what we have is a child who hits a ball through a window of a basement, follows it into the basement, trying not to get
away
caught.
The ending?
No, this is the beginning.
Okay.
The child follows the ball into the basement, trying not to get caught. In doing so, trying to avoid getting caught, he falls onto a coal pile. And when the owner of the house finally leaves the basement, he looks at what he has in his hand, and it's a piece of coal with a shiny golden gleam to it. He finds out later that there's a gold coin in that coal, but it's not exactly a coin. And the adventure begins pretty much from there.
How would you plot that? I'm going to backtrack a second. You said you love to paint. Would you incorporate artistry into your plotting of something? Do you draw it out? Do you just make an outline? Are you a pantser?
There you go. Pantser versus plotter. I am pretty much a pantser because that's the way I paint as well. I'm iterative, which means I'll put something down, look at it for a while, and then change it. And then I'll look at it for a little longer and change it again until I'm sort of happy with what I've got, knowing that if I change it one more time, I'm not getting anywhere further. With writing, I let the story unfold in a way that I'm not aware prior to writing. This way, it's surprising to both me and the reader. Almost unavoidable surprising to the reader. There is a danger in that, though. I ran into that about midway through the book, where I had a bunch of people lost in a coal mine and basically kind of trapped in the coal mine. And I really couldn't figure out how they were going to get out of this thing. And it took me months and months just thinking about it. And finally, I did work out a way. I had to draw an outline of all things and figure out step by step what would happen. And that got me out. So the outline has its place in my writing, but it's not the first place.
That's amazing. I cannot write without some sort of plot. I get myself lost. I think I get lost just going across the street. So I would really get lost in my own work if I didn't have a plot to follow. Well, what do you think they could gain the most from reading your works?
Hopefully for appreciation for the science that is in the work. A second thing would be an appreciation for surprises that occur in a person's journey through life. What I want to see, actually, is something I saw in the kids in the park when I was a kid. I would come back from seeing a movie, and I would tell them what happened in the movie, from the beginning through the middle to the climactic end. They would sit there, listen, and I think they were enthralled. I don't think they were bored. But that was such a fun thing to do. And I could see in their eyes that they're really following me along. And it felt so good and so much fun to deliver a story. And that was just retelling a story. And now that I can create my own stories, I want to see that same thing happen to people. And thankfully, from the few people that actually read my books, I've gotten that feedback. They really do enjoy it.
You ever have a fan come up to you?
Yes.
And what's that experience like?
Well, it's exactly that experience. It's a surprise. It's a delight. And believe me, it's not an ego fulfillment thing at all. I'm just so happy somebody could see what I saw in a particular episode or scene or situation. It was almost like sharing an experience with someone.
I imagine that would be one of the thrills of your life, is to have people be excited to meet you because you created something that inspired them.
Yeah, it's the full circle. Otherwise, a writer is not complete. He doesn't actually communicate with someone. I don't know what that writer's doing. You really want to get that complete circle. You want to see people enjoy what you saw, what you experienced. Because a lot of times, actually, when you write, and really good writing, and this happens only a few times for me, when there's a situation or scene that you're actually writing about that's emotional, and you find yourself now crying while you're writing, that's a scene that you know is true, and it's true in the sense of human nature. And if that scene also moves someone else, you've really accomplished a big deal.
I know there are blunders in other people's science fiction works. What's your favorite one?
Oh, well, the easiest ones to pick off are the ones you see in Hollywood. And I know they're not exactly writing, but they are screenwriting. And, noise in space, explosions and such simply cannot happen. And yet we really demand them as viewers, don't we? Otherwise, all you're listening to is this.
Boring.
So those are typical blunders. I don't actually see too many blunders in science fiction writing, good science fiction books, because the reader gets invested in what the writer or the author is trying to sell. And usually the author is clever enough that even if there's fantasy elements woven into the story, the reader accepts that and say, okay, all right, fine. This is the world you've created. Now let's see what happens in this world. So it works out pretty well in science fiction stories and books. But in the movies, it's pretty blatant that it's really off-center. There's only a few movies that I can recall that come close to being reflecting real science.
I wish I knew more about science. I have to say woefully that I am not that averse, not that educated in my sciences. I skated, I would say, on thin ice there on my way through college. All right, we're going to begin our rapid fire session. All right, you ready?
Ready.
Use one word to describe your computer ability.
Excellent.
Excellent. Oh, that's awesome. And you can do like every program, or are you just intuitive?
I pick it up pretty quickly, but you have to remember that in my job as a scientist, I wrote for computer programs. So I think that it's kind of funny when people call their computers because 9 times out of 10, maybe 99 times out of 100, they're not really using them as computers, are they? They're on the net reading something. They're not actually writing a program, are they now? That's what computers were for at one time, but now not anymore.
What was the longest car trip you've ever taken?
From Florida to California. We were going back home where we used to live in Los Angeles, and we had visited my mom in Florida. We took off on Route 10. For some reason, we both decided, my wife and I, that we'll just go without stopping. We used the rule that whoever's driving at the time, if the tires touch the line in the road, that we switch drivers. And it worked out pretty well at 4 hours apiece for a while, and then it was 2 hours apiece, and then it was like 1 hour and maybe 15 minutes. But we made it in about 52 hours of driving. It was quite exciting.
Last question. If you could swim in any liquid, what would it be?
Where'd you get that question from? For some reason, it just occurred to me that mercury would be a fine thing to swim in as long as it didn't kill you.
Okay.
But it would be easier to float on mercury since it's a molten liquid at room temperature. So, that would be the one I'd pick.
That'd be just like, it'd be like at the
you'd be walking on
Salt Lake.
Really.
You just hang out, float on the top, no big deal.
Way easier than Salt Lake.
Way easier than Salt Lake. All right, no life preserver necessary.
No.
All right. Arthur, this has been absolutely enjoyable. Thank you so much for listening to the Florida Writer Podcast. This is Allison Nissen. Allison out. And what?
No, that's fine. I was going to say an Arthur.
Oh, no, I said Arthur, didn't I?
No. Yes, you did.
I did? I did.
Still being recorded?
Sure.
No, it's fine.
And Arthur?
You.
Did I say author instead of Arthur?
Oh, that'd be fun.
Do people do that?
Yes.
They
misspell my name.
They just, I probably would, because I have.
That's probably one of the reasons I became an author.
Yes. Subliminal. Nice.
Well, thanks very much for having me.
Absolutely. All right. Allison out for real. Bye. Arthur Doweyko is a scientist in the area of drug design and has published over 100 scientific articles, as well as presenting his work at domestic and international venues. He has published 3 books, 2 of which have garnered RPLA awards, and numerous short stories in both print and electronic anthologies. For more information on Arthur, visit him on the web at www.arthurmdoweyko.com. That's www.arthurmdoweyko.com. For more information about the Florida Writers Association, visit us on the web at www.floridawriters.net.